Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Smethberg, Chair of the WMATA Board. Thank you for being here today at our special Board of Directors meeting. Before we move on to any business, I'd like to ask that we take a moment of silence for our heroic colleague, Mr. Robert Cunningham, who lost his life trying to protect others during a senseless shooting at the Potomac Avenue Metro Rail Station last week. Mr. Cunningham was loved and admired by his wife and 4 children, his friends, his co-workers, his neighbors, and his community. He is truly a hero. Now let's take a moment to remember Mr. Cunningham. Thank you. Now I'll turn the floor over to the General Manager for a few words.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate your comments and appreciate everyone joining in a moment of silence. Want to first thank the community for their ongoing support and care of the Cunningham family and for the entire Metro staff. There's been just a lot of outpouring of support and it is deeply appreciated. This organization, as I've said very publicly, we are looking after Mr. Cunningham's family. We have, and we will continue to do that. But I think it speaks volumes for this community that a GoFundMe page was set up, and I haven't looked at the recent total, but I think it was $175,000, $180,000 was already contributed to that GoFundMe page. When I talked to Mr. Cunningham's wife, one of the things she mentioned was that Bob decided not to retire yet because one of the things he was working on was to earn a little bit more money this year with some overtime and other work to help his kids with school. And I know that GoFundMe page will contribute significantly to looking after that family for life. And I just really want to thank the entire community for their generosity and care as well. Our leadership team, I want the board, to know this and publicly as well. Our leadership team has been actively meeting with our staff, and I want to thank many board members have come out on tours of the system and at meetings with staff as well, and I just really want to thank you for your time doing that. We've been out talking to a lot of staff. We have a lot of town halls set up actually next week. Different times of the day, different days of the week, really trying to engage as many of our staff as possible, really working through employee assistance, our EAP program. Part of these conversations too is allow staff to discuss security and what they feel and just their overall kind of wellness. I will say I've been just amazed and just in awe of the resiliency of this team. And many people at this organization were obviously hurt deeply by what happened and saddened and angry, quite frankly, angry that the ongoing gun violence in America has happened to come into Metro. But the resiliency of showing up even the day after being fully staffed to support this community and move this community. This is an organization full of professionals that have a lot of pride in what they do, and I just want to really thank the staff for what they do every day. It's great. Yesterday, many of you saw that we had an announcement with the district and Metropolitan Police Department, MPD, and I want to call out again the mayor. The mayor's leadership has been fantastic. I want to personally thank her. I know as the organization, but personally, she's reached out many times. I know, as a former board member at Metro, I know last week hit her, just like all of us, and I want to thank her for her leadership in trying to, deal with public safety that she articulated better than I can. It's an ongoing issue, whether it's on the street, at home, or if it happens to be at Metro. The idea is how do we have the safest community possible. So I want to thank her and Chief Conti for working with us on some supplemental staffing on overtime that we can have more patrols. Those patrols are going to allow our officers to be on trains and buses to a higher level. As I mentioned this board, we just had an update a week and a half ago from our chief and our COO, Brian Dwyer. We've already increased patrols 25-30%. but this will allow us to get upwards of 60% more patrols on buses and trains. And that's where I know a lot of customers and staff really want to see officers. We are hoping that other regional partners, we're in discussions with other regional partners. Everyone is short-staffed from a public safety point of view, and we understand and appreciate that. But anyone that has the availability, we are looking for their partnership as well, and I appreciate that. I just want to end with, I've said this at this dais many times since I've been here, and I want to reiterate, there is nothing that this team, and I know I speak for the board on this, but especially the management team and the staff, there's nothing that we care more about than the safety of the customers and staff at this organization. Every moment I wake up, every moment I go to bed, it's the thing I think about the most. And so while I do believe this system is safe, I did 6 trips yesterday myself. I was on the system again this morning. I'm on the system every single day. It does not mean the job's done. We will continue to flex in and do everything humanly possible, knowing that there's a lot of stuff that we do not have the ability to control in this world. Unfortunately, where the shooting occurred was just over a mile from the people that actually could make gun policy in America. And, quite frankly, we as a country have to come to grips with what is happening with gun violence. But I want to reassure the community that Metro is doing everything it can to work on safety, because your safety is the paramount thing we think about every day. So with that, Chair, thank you for recognizing Mr. Cunningham, and thank you all board members for your support. It's been a troubling week, but again, the resilience of the team, I think, is showing why this organization is so important for the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. And I want to say something. Dr. Lowe and I last week were out with you and Mr. Roth, and we saw firsthand that resiliency, that professionalism, and the optimism, and the service and the dedication that these people have to the community and to our customers. We saw it, as I said, we saw it firsthand. We talked to a lot of people, and it was just really sort of heartening to see. That's because of your leadership and all this other members of the team have done. So really appreciate all that our employees did during this really difficult time, and being out there on the front lines. When you ride the system and you get out in that kind of way, when you see it firsthand, people who are on the front line, so to speak, it gives you a very, very different perspective of what they're dealing with every day. So it was very much appreciated, and it was really, like I said, very heartening to see. So thank you for that. Okay, since this is our first meeting of the day, I'll ask the Board Corporate Secretary, Jennifer Ellison, to call the roll.
Chair Smedberg?
Present.
Vice Chair Babers? Present. Mr. Goldman?
Present.
Ms. Klein? Present. Mr. Letourneau?
Present.
Dr. Lowe? Present. Mr. Drummer?
Present.
Ms. Martin Proctor? Good morning. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Now we'll move to the approval of the agenda. If there are no objections to the agenda as presented, hearing none, the agenda is approved. We have one item on today's agenda, revision to board committee assignments. I would like to move that the Board of Directors approve the following revisions to board committee assignments. Mr. Drummer, Executive Committee and Board's second Vice Chair. Mr. Wiedefeld, Finance and Capital Committee. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Goldman. Any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Ellison, please administer the vote.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers? Aye. Mr. Goldman?
Aye.
Ms. Klein? Aye. Mr. Letourneau?
Aye.
Dr. Lowe? Aye. Mr. Drummer?
Aye.
Ms. Martin Proctor? Aye. Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. That's all the business we have before us this morning. We will stand adjourned. I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Letourneau for the Finance and Committee meeting, and as we can hear, Matt is joining us. He's a bit under the weather. Hope you're feeling better, Matt.
Not so much. I don't want to get everybody sick there today, so I am home just battling a cold. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning and welcome to the Finance and Capital Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us. Our first order of business is to approve the agenda. If there are no objections, we'll consider the agenda approved as presented. Are there any objections? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Now to the approval of the minutes. We have the minutes of our January 12th meeting. Are there any objections to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. We only have one item on our agenda this morning. Staff is seeking approval to issue dedicated revenue bonds to support Metro's capital program. These bonds will be backed by the dedicated capital funding. I will ask our Chief Financial Officer to provide more details about the bond issuance, as well as other opportunities that Metro is considering on the capital fund. I'll turn it over to Utende.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Okay, a little closer. Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Yetunde Olumide. I'm the Chief Financial Officer here at Metro. I'm joined by Mr. Robert Haas, our treasurer. The purpose of this presentation is to seek board approval for the terms and parameters of the Series 2023A bond issue. Metro pledges approximately $465 million of its $500 million dedicated capital revenues to secure immediate funds through bond issuance. These funds are used to invest in capital projects across categories in this table, which shows the use of capital investment funds by category for FY23 approved budget and the proposed FY24 to 29 proposed CIP. Debt will provide approximately $885 million of the $2.5 billion in funding for FY23 capital investments. This will be achieved from carryover of Series 2021A bond funds and this Series 2023A bond issuance. This slide is just for reference and is a snapshot of the market today. The next slide is a plan of finance which includes debt service beginning in FY24 through 2049. This chart shows the level of all debt service relating to dedicated revenue bonds. The existing bonds 2020A and 2021A having an outstanding principal of about $1.3 billion amounts to approximately $91 million in an annual debt service. This 2023A bond sale, adding about $392 million of principal, will increase annual debt service by approximately $23 million until 2048, when annual debt service will be approximately $114 million for years 2048 and 2049. The proposed terms of this bond sale parameters are not to exceed: final maturity not to exceed 28 years, principal issued is $392 million, interest costs not to exceed 7%, and ratings consistent with prior bond issues, AA for S&P and Fitch, and AA plus for KBRA. The timeline of activities include investor meetings beginning after the February 23rd board approval. Bond sale and pricing is scheduled for the first week in March, and the bond proceeds received by mid-March, and these dates are subject to the final sale date. Some future considerations could include TIFIA, which require investment-grade ratings and standard compliance with federal requirements. There we go, okay. Staff recommends authorization of the issuance of the Series 2023A bonds and approval of the supplemental bond resolution. Mr. Chairman, that concludes our presentation, and I'll take any questions you may have.
Thanks. I'll need somebody to help me with who's asking questions in the room, but can you go back to that TIFIA slide and maybe give us a little bit more on that potential opportunity, because it's obviously more attractive from a interest rate standpoint?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. So the current TIFIA rate is approximately the 3.6%. TIFIA loans finance anywhere from 30 to almost 50% of eligible transit project costs. We're able to support some of our bus programs, as other transit agencies have done using TIFIA. The maximum loan maturity is right about 35 years of completion. Principal repayment can be deferred, again, based on market, up to 10 years. So this slide here just speaks to some of the characteristics of a TIFIA project.
Okay, but so there's nothing specifically proposed at this point?
No, sir, there's nothing specifically proposed at this point. Just we just wanted to share with you that these are other considerations that we could go into in the future.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mr. Spedberg, do you want to handle the questions in the room?
I actually have a question. You tend to bring your first slides with the dedicated funding. This one here, yeah. No. So the dedicated funding, just as a point of information, that what calendar year does that agreement run out? The line there at the bottom, or near the bottom, dedicated funding, through the proposed fiscal year 29 or financial year 29.
I don't have that date with me, but I can get that to you.
Okay, I was just curious. Do we know, Patty?
Sorry, Chair, do you mean the agreement?
The agreement.
Or do you mean when we would have money available for capital versus just debt financing?
Well,
Because the second,
the second question
part,
is the
I
important.
think, Tom, you told me we're about 2029, maybe into 2030. It really depends on kind of burn rate.
Yeah.
And at that point, though, I believe the agreement it's still long-term. There's no problem with the agreement. What the agreement will do is do debt financing, and the volume that we'll spend on capital will just depreciate till it's 100% debt financing.
Well, that's what I
So it's about 29.
That's why I was asking.
2030.
Okay, so 2030. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, and that means, we're all very cognizant of the operating problem that we have because it's staring us in the face, but it also means that as we engage in the operating question, we should also be engaging in this longer-term capital issue as well.
That's right, and you've made that point very clear, Mr. Chair, and rightly so. Ms. Klein and then Mr. Goldman.
Yeah, thanks. Two questions. Just to understand on TIFIA, is that being suggested as a possible alternative for this bond issuance, or something that we'd look at in the future rather than additional bond issuances?
Thank you for your question, Ms. Klein. This is something that we'll be looking at in the future.
Okay.
Yes.
And my second question is, I wasn't clear from the presentation, have we received the green bond certification, or are we still waiting for that?
We have received the green bond certification.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Goldman and then Dr. Lowe.
Yeah, I just wanted to focus on the slide that says Plan of Finance, paren 392 bar. And I think I'm just following up on Chair's questions. So this slide is showing that the debt service, the annual debt service, will tick up to about $115 million with this bond offering annually. Is that what this is showing?
Correct.
All right, but this does not include further bond offerings for FY24 through FY26, 27, 28, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Goldman.
And so the amount of annual debt services would increase per year with additional servicings up to the cap of $465 million.
That's also correct, Mr. Goldman.
And so I think what you said in response to Mr. Smedberg's questions, or maybe it was General Manager said, is that you expect to hit that cap or that ceiling in about FY29 or FY30. Is that correct?
Thereabout.
And is that forecast based on prior annual interest rates, or has that taken into account the kind of 7% rate you're going to pay on this offering, and perhaps continuation of 7% offerings for the next 12, 24, or 36 months?
This is taking into consideration the current 7% going forward. However, those rates are still due to market changes.
So is the assumption that 7% rates would continue to apply to bond offerings through FY 28, 29?
At this point, you want to take that?
I'm happy to answer that, thank you. So we know that the market can fluctuate, right? The 7% is a cap. The market is below that, but we want to have flexibility when we go to market because of the need for the capital funds to hit that 7% if necessary. But the plan that we looked at looks at current market, the current forecast of what market rates are, and assuming also that we are looking at going to the capital markets. Now, as the attendee noted earlier, TIFIA can provide us some advantages to potentially expand and allow us to hit that 2029 target.
Right. I just want to focus on the $465 million dedicated funding and the annual target. My question is, when I was last a board member 2 years ago, the projection was that based on interest rates at that time, which were in the range of 2 or 3%, that we would hit the cap in FY 28 or 29. My question is it still your projection that we'll hit the cap in 28, 29, and does that reflect the higher interest rates that has resulted from Fed actions over the last 12 or 18 months?
That is correct. Yes.
Which is correct? That you're still projecting
that we
we'll
are
hit the
still-
cap in 28 or 29?
Yes, sir.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Dr. Lowe.
Thank you for your question, Dr. Liu. I believe we have looked at TIFIA before. Now we're talking about FY25. We're looking at previously. So this is just one consideration we're bringing before you.
Maybe I should follow up on this later. I don't really think that answered my question, but it's kind of a digression from the bond issue.
I can try to help board members. So I have a little familiar with TIFIA, but the point is when I asked the team to let's start doing a deeper dive on that, more thinking about our type of program. So for instance, we might be looking at our electrification program through that. So a lot of times people are using TIFIA for some new starts kind of financing or some of those other projects, but they also want and willing to help on these they become more flexible, I think, over years, and they're trying to engage agencies to work more creatively. So we want to start having that conversation. Just want to really ground everyone, though, it is a complicated process with USDOT, and that's not saying that they're complicated, it's just the way the process is. So it costs money to go through the process, and it takes a fair amount of time. So PFM is our financial advisor. They've done TIFIA programs for a lot of other agencies around the country. So we're having those detailed conversations, and then we want to go down and engage that at movie yard and think through what programs may work, what doesn't work, what a timeline looks like, and then bring back to the board as another potential financing tool in a portfolio going forward.
Okay, so it's about thinking about the right package for it, and it makes more sense to look at it now, given where interest rates are, but also where we are in our capital plan.
Right.
And I think my guess would be that having the electrification transition plan will help us think more holistically about that as a package and tack the kind of serious dollars onto it that will justify the overhead.
It could be that. It could be our communications-based train control and our 8000 series trains. There's a variety of packages that the team is thinking through. It's a different way we're going to start looking at the capital program, both delivery and financing together. I mean, America had very cheap money for a long time, and money's not as cheap, so we need to be probably a little bit more creative longer term.
Randy, I love the way you're thinking about this.
Well, thank you, but it's really Utendi and Tom and Robert.
I love the way the team is thinking about this.
That's it in the room, Mr. Chair.
Okay, yeah, I'll just add, so Loudoun County actually had a TIFIA loan on the Silver Line projects, and so I have a lot of familiarity with that option. And, it adds administrative work and requirements, but as the GM just said, given the price of money, definitely worth pursuing. So I appreciate the work on that. Okay, if there then are no further questions about it, then I will move I actually will move the recommendation to the full board of the dedicated revenue bond funding. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion on the motion? All right, then we'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Chair Letourneau?
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers? Aye. Mr. Goldman?
Aye.
Ms. Klein?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Okay, thank you. And with no further business to come before the committee, we stand adjourned. The Safety and Operations Committee is next, and I will turn the floor over to Chair Drummer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. Good morning and welcome to today's Safety and Operations Committee. Our first order of business is to approve the agenda. For members of the committee, are there any objections? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Now to approval of the minutes of our January 26th meeting. Are there any objections to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. We have one item on the agenda this morning. Staff will provide an update on Team Metro's second quarter performance covering the period October, November, and December 2022. I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Webster and Ms. Holt to begin the presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee and the board. My name is Tom Webster, Chief of Planning and Performance. I'm joined this morning by Jordan Holt, our Director of Performance. We're pleased to be here to present the fiscal year 23 second quarter Metro Performance Report. This report reflects and advances Metro's commitment to transparency and using data and information to measure performance, report on performance, inform planning and decision-making, and continue our focus on continuous improvement. Two of our most important metrics, top-level metrics, continue to trend positively, both customer satisfaction and ridership. Rail customer satisfaction increased to 79%, and bus customer satisfaction increased to 75% in the recent quarter. As activity continues to increase across the region, and we've added frequency and capacity in service. Also, system-wide ridership continues to increase, and yesterday we had our second highest rail ridership day since the pandemic. For most measures, 21 of the 25 featured here, performance is either met target or is moving in the right direction. Jordan will now present the highlights of performance for the first half of the year.
Thank you. Okay, next slide. Oh, sorry, back one. Oh, perfect, sorry. I can do it. Excuse me. So this slide provides both a summary of our fiscal year-to-date performance, as well as a table of contents for what we'll be talking in more detail about today. So in these two tables, you see each row is one of our performance measures. And we provide information about how that measure looks according to the targets we set for the fiscal year, where blue means we met target, light orange is we just missed target, orange is we did not meet target, and gray we have not set a target. Usually we don't set a target for measures where we don't have historical data, so we don't know what target to set. So for those measures, we will intend to set a target for next fiscal year. We also provide information about whether that measure is trending in the right direction, or the desired direction. And that really looks at Q2 results relative to Q1. Today's presentation will focus on a subset of measures, those that are in the blue chart on the left. Information for all measures, however, including those on the right, is provided as an appendix in this presentation. Ridership and customer satisfaction are two measures that align with our goals, both to provide excellent service and contribute to improving regional opportunity, connecting communities. We focus on on-time performance because we know service reliability is a key driver of both customer satisfaction and ridership. Bus missed service is an area where we've seen improvements and want to highlight those actions that we've been taking. Finally, we've heard from our customers and employees that safety and security are a top priority. So we wanted to provide some of the results of what we're seeing there and what we're doing. So starting with customer satisfaction, both rail and bus customer satisfaction have seen 11 to 12 percentage point increases over the past 12 months, which is huge. The targets we set for these measures, which we've met for rail and are approaching for bus, represent a return to the 5-year average level of satisfaction. We know from what our customers tell us that these increases are driven by adding more service, which results in shorter wait times, and particularly on the bus by focusing on the accuracy of the real-time information that we're providing and ensuring that they know when the buses are arriving. For Metro Access customer satisfaction, you see the results are actually on par with where we are with rail and bus at 78%. It has been declining over the last 12 months. And what we know from what our customers tell us is in part this is a return to shared rides. So in FY22, about 7% of Metro Access trips were shared, and in FY23 that number has increased to 42%. So customers are no longer receiving direct origin to destination trips, although for more than 90% of trips, the time of the trip is better than the fixed route equivalent. So we do know that they're being routed efficiently. Looking at ridership, you can see from the graph that over the past 30 months, ridership has been steadily increasing across our modes. Over the first 6 months of fiscal year 23, we carried 91 million riders, and about 55% of those were on bus and 45% were on rail. As expected, when we look at kind of what we saw in FY21 and FY22, we saw a peak in ridership in October and a slight decrease in November and December related to the holidays. It's a seasonality. When you look at Metro Access ridership, which is the graph on the bottom left, you see that we've really kind of plateaued in terms of ridership over the last definitely 12 months. The Silver Line, we opened phase 2 for the last 6 months of this last 6 weeks of this 6-month time period, and we saw kind of at those 6 new stations, 333 passenger trips entering and exiting those 6 stations, and we estimate that about 40% of those trips are new. So it's trips that weren't previously taken kind of by driving to Wheelie or boarding at Wheelie. I wanted to delve into a few of the patterns that we're seeing, in part to show how we're using this data decisions. So some of the trends we're seeing on Metro Rail are more trips are happening on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So those are 10 to 20% more busy than prior days. Tom mentioned that I wanted to delve into a few of the patterns that we're seeing yesterday. It was a Wednesday to show how we're using this data is also a Wednesday. So you're seeing some of the trends we're seeing on Metro Rail are more trips are happening on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So those are 10 to 20% more busy than prior days. Tom mentioned that I wanted to delve into a few of the patterns that we're seeing yesterday. It was a Wednesday to show how we're using this data is also a Wednesday. Of those trips that happen at 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. is nearing what we saw back in 2019. So when you look at this graph, you're hovering around 26.5% of trips happened at 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. You see that really dropped when the pandemic hit, when people basically stopped traveling and stayed at home, and it's been steadily increasing. And today, as of the end of December, we're at about 25% of trips are happening in the 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. hour. As you know, that's kind of what we're using when we announce service increases. That's why we're increasing service on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at these peak hours on our lines. I also wanted to, while that slide focused really on the commuting patterns, I wanted to also highlight where we're seeing kind of robust ridership on nights and weekends. So we do see customers using our system to travel to destinations for nightlife, sports, concerts, museums, shopping, and hospitals. Wanted to highlight that key areas, key stations where we see over 10,000 entries and exits on the weekends are Gallery Place, Metro Center, and Foggy Bottom. You also see kind of strong ridership on several of our core bus routes, the 50s that travel along 14th Street, the X2, the 90s, and the 30s. Moving to service reliability, we'll start with rail. So first I want to say that between July and December, we've been steadily increasing service, and this has resulted in faster trips for customers. So on average, customers are waiting about 2 to 3 minutes less due to the service increases we provided. A full 60% of trips are faster in December than in July. What this measures is how reliable those trips are. And so what we're saying is 90% of those trips were on time. That means customers experienced waits that were better than or at expected frequency levels. So if you think you're going to wait 8 minutes, you shouldn't wait longer than 8 minutes. And so that's what that is, as well as train trips that weren't disrupted by trains holding or slow zones, et cetera. When you look at the graph, you see that there was a slight decrease in on-time performance in November and December, and that is related to an increase in incidents where trains were holding for police response. That number has doubled compared to the first 6 months of fiscal year 22, and that each incident delays trains and customers about 7 minutes. So some things we're doing here is we're in the process of hiring about 24 customer experience liaisons. These will be people who spend a lot of their time on platforms at key stations, helping customers with wayfinding, as well as improving responses to disruptions. On bus on-time performance, we did not meet our target here, but I do want to call attention to the improvement that we've seen since September. So on-time performance fell to a low in September and has been steadily increasing. And in part, that's due to efforts by our scheduling staff to improve the accuracy of schedules, and that helps customers by the bus will arrive more likely when you expect it to, so that's good. As well as a big focus on ensuring on-time departures from our depots. If you don't leave on time, you're not going to be on time, so we want to make sure we're leaving on time, as well as ensuring that all GPS units are enabled so those buses appear in our real-time information feeds. On Metro Access, we met our target. Our target was set at 92%, and we exceeded it slightly at 92.4%. I do want to explain some of the decreases you see over that trend chart that shows performance over the last 30 months. First, I want to call attention to the fact that performance in FY21 was at a record high. And this is related to the fact that we were not doing shared rides. We had eliminated shared rides. So customers were getting kind of door-to-door service from origin to destination. And that meant there was less of an impact of cascading delays across the system. We also had a lot of driver resources, so we were able to really manage very well trips throughout the day that were projected to be late. You see also a slight dip in performance in December. We know that is related to operator callouts from our service providers, and so that's why our providers have been utilizing incentives to operators to work overtime as well as minimize absences. We have also been steadily adding staff to our control center to make sure that we have enough people there to monitor the late board and address late trips. And so they do that by either reassigning those trips to taxis or alternative services, or perhaps reassigning them to other operators along the way. Bus missed trips. So this is one where I want to highlight the improvements we've had in performance. So in July, we were missing about 1.9% of our scheduled service. And you see kind of in the last 3 months of, or in the 3 months of Q2, October through December, we were more at 1.3%. To put this in perspective, we operate over 13,000 bus trips a day. So 1.3% is about 175 trips that we're missing. We know that operator availability is the top reason for missing trips. It is something that I think you've been told we've been steadily focused on and have been able to recruit about 100 new operators and graduate them from training and have them begin driving in Q2. I also want to highlight that this is, when we look in the industry, we know that operator availability is an industry-wide problem. We actually are performing very well. When we look at our peers, including Chicago and New York, they're missing more like 5 to 15% of service. So the fact that we're only missing 1.3 is pretty amazing. Finally, we've heard directly from our customers and our employees that safety and security are a key concern. That was highlighted in particular by the tragic events 2 weeks ago, over the past few weeks. And we have seen this in our data. When you look at bus customer and employee assaults, you see regional violence and crime in the region spilling over onto our system. We had 24 assaults during the first 6 months of the year. These are customers or employees that required immediate medical attention. But what we see is really driving that is customer upon customer assaults. That's been the big increase. On rail employee injuries, we see kind of stress claims being one of the top injury types. And when we look at what drives these claims looking at data over the past few years, we see that 40% are witnessing violence or fights in the system. And 35% have some signs of assault, such as verbal assaults, attempted physical assaults. And 25% are about being involved in a stressful event, usually related to sick passengers or witnessing deceased passengers. As you know from yesterday's announcement, we are partnering with, and I believe highlighted it in earlier remarks, we're partnering with the Metro Police Department to increase police presence throughout the system and focusing initially at 5 stations and at key times. And finally, wanted to conclude with something that we're working on to provide you an update on a particular dashboard. So this report that you receive focuses system and mode level, which is good for oversight and accountability and tracking our progress towards goals. From a customer's perspective, I know personally, I always want to know what's happening. What happened on the green line yesterday? What happened to my trip? How's the H4? How's the H8 doing? And so what we're working on is building a dashboard that will allow customers, member of the public, to drill down to that level. And so what we're focusing on is how much service was provided, what level of service was missed, how was the service on time, did we give you accurate and real-time information, and then also delving into crowding and ridership. So you'll be able to drill into particular lines, particular routes, particular times of day that are more relevant to your own personal experience. And with that, I conclude our presentation.
Thank Thank you very much, Tom and Jordan. I do have a couple of questions, but I'll hold my questions and open the floor to committee members. Ms. Martin Parker.
Hi, thank you so much for that report. I truly appreciate the information that you shared. It really gives us a much fuller picture of what we're doing and how we're moving forward. I do have one small question. You mentioned in the presentation with regards to hold times for police response. Does that include hold times for medical emergencies?
That does not include hold time for medical emergencies. We can look into that as well. I was looking at particularly kind of what changed, what was driving November and December performance levels, and really what we saw was there was more hold times for police response.
I really appreciate that. It just been 2 incidents with me with regards personally on the train where we had sick passengers, and so there were hold times, but it wasn't for a police incident. It was literally to provide medical assistance to somebody else. I will circle back on the follow-up. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Sure. Do you mind if I add just a quick comment on that? I appreciate them bringing up that important number, and when I saw this report, I wanted Jordan specifically to call that out. And while that does interrupt service, it also, I think, highlights what we've been talking about, which is how much more police presence we have on the system. So just sitting here during this board meeting, I alerts all day long, we just had a train held at Lafont on a green line, and there was juveniles doing something that they weren't supposed to be doing on the train was held, and officers just removed them. So this is happening, this happens throughout the day, just like, a normal city, and I think this speaks to how much the chief has done a redeployment plan, how many visible officers are out there. So we want to reassure the public. In a lot of ways, this statistic shows the validity of how many more officers are out there. We want to get to a point where that behavior obviously gets reduced so we don't have service impacts. Again, I just wanted to really put a fine point of how many officers we have out there, and yesterday's announcement, we're going to do more so that we can get to a point where we're not impacting service. So it's not only safer, but not impacting service as well. So thank you for bringing that point up.
No, thank you, Randy, absolutely. And I just want to make sure that the community knows that, yes, we are providing police officers, but we are also making sure that there is medical care for anybody that is in need while in transit.
Thank you, Randy. Dr. Lowe?
Thanks, Chair. Let's talk about the slide that's currently up. I'll do these backwards. This is so cool. And when I first joined the board, my very first board meeting, someone submitted a public comment complaining about the U6 and how often it was late. There is an app called Metro Hero that a lot of us have used over the years to explore really detailed analytics about how these kind of hyper-specific performance issues play out inside the system. It is such a huge piece of progress for WMATA that we are now going to be able to offer these kinds of analytics to the public to understand what's happening inside the system, but also just internally for ourselves to inform how we manage and prioritize the system. Metro Hero is sunsetting their app, and one thing that really stood out for me in the announcement about that, which was yesterday or the day before, is that they mentioned one of the reasons why they're sunsetting the app is because of how much WMATA's own internal data tracking and analytics and performance measurement and transparency has changed over these past few years since Metro Hero first was a startup. So I just want to note what a milestone this is going to be when we have this dashboard. And I'm just wowed by how sophisticated this is. I'm a big fan of the performance report, and this is great. The metric that I'm always the most focused on is the missed bus trips, just because I'm always trying to understand it. This month's report was really helpful for me for that, because I remember like the first time we talked about this metric, I was like, 1.9, that seems like such a small number. 1.3 just seems like a slightly smaller number. Are these even different numbers? Thank you for doing the math for me. and helping me understand that we're talking about 175 trips, because that helps me understand that 1.9 is 247 trips, and that a change from 1.9 to 1.3 is 78 trips, but a change of 46%, that's a huge number. If the chances of you missing a trip is going down 46%, massive improvement in the customer experience, which like 1.9 to 1.3 I wasn't like feeling it in the way we were presenting it, but now I understand it. So it's always like a good thing when I can sanity check feelings and data together, and this provided a lot more clarity for me. So I thank you, and I really appreciate it. My final question is related to the trip that Randy and Paul and I did to meet with frontline employees up and down the Green Line. We were talking to a bus operator who mentioned that when the GPS is not working on a bus, that it delays MTPD response time. So this is not just an issue for being able to provide good trip predictions. It's clearly also a safety issue and just about like being able to have our operators' backs when they're out there on the front line. So I feel like in the past I've asked about making sure that buses have working GPS in the context of trip prediction, and I now have a whole new appreciation for why this is important from a safety perspective. Do we know what percentage of buses do not have working GPS, distinct from buses where it just has not been? I live close enough to the bus terminal that many times I get on the bus and they're like still turning it on. Like I do understand that there is an issue about remembering to turn it on, but distinctly, do we know how many buses do not have working GPS?
We track that daily. So what we track is we know buses that are not reporting, and we can look at when the last time that bus did report. Did the GPS work? And we have that hot list. And so then bus maintenance acts on it to ensure to kind of enter work orders and get those fixed. So I can tell you that kind of in Q2, we fixed about 40 of those GPSs. So it's kind of an ongoing.
It's a moving target.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of not the same. It's not like you fix them and then they do break.
Yeah.
So I will tell you, we are tracking it. We have the data, we have the reporting, we have a dashboard, we have a list. And so we're actively trying to manage that. So we do know, you're right, it has safety implications. It's a horrible experience for customers. And that's within our control to fix.
Great, and that's a number that we're like working on, we're constantly working on reducing and actively monitoring. That's great.
Thank you, Dr. Lowe. Mr. Goldman?
Chairman, thank you for your report. Let me just ask you a question or two on the ridership slide, if we can ever find it again. My said it's 12 of 80. I don't know if it's the same on yours. There we go. Now, your slide here starts in FY21, so it really starts in the depths of the pandemic in the summer of 2020. And I guess the relevant pre-COVID period would be the fourth quarter of 2019, October, November, December. And so was that the period that you had in mind when you said that Metro Rail ridership was 40 or 45% below pre-COVID levels, or was there another period you had in mind?
It's around that time. We have like an average benchmark that we use, and it's kind of for FY19, pre-pandemic.
FY19?
Which FY20.
20, okay.
Yeah, thank you for that.
All right, and so when you said 40 to 45%, were you just giving a range, or are you saying sort of 40% is Monday through Friday and 45% are weekends, or what exactly were we to take from the 40-45% range that you were giving us?
It's a range in part because, as you see here, we hit a high in October and it fell in November and December. So during that period, it was 40 to 45%.
Okay, could you sort of just put that in writing and just send it to us, or send it to me, what the exact numbers were for that October, November, December
Yes.
2019 versus October, November, December 2022. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Ms. Klein?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think when talking about on-time performance, I always like to remind myself, and I guess everyone else, what the definition of on-time is for each mode. Would you mind running through that briefly?
Sure. Okay. So Metro Rail on-time performance, what we're actually measuring is each customer trip. So I'll give you an example from today. I think it's easiest to understand with an example. So I live near Columbia Heights, so I travel from Columbia Heights to L'Enfant Plaza in my morning. And at Columbia Heights, so I take the Green Line, I should wait no longer than 8 minutes. We're running 8-minute headways when I went 8-minute frequencies when I travel. That train trip, I believe, should be the time it takes from the train once it arrives at Columbia Heights to when it arrives at L'Enfant Plaza is 10 minutes. So what we also add is we know how long it takes customers on average to kind of walk from the platform to the fare gates and vice versa. Typically, that's like a minute. So my trip should take no longer than 20 minutes. And we have figured out how that time for every single trip in the system at all times a day. And so every day we're calculating how much time it actually took for each trip and comparing it to that reference time frame and determining whether that trip is on time or late. So for me personally, my trip is on time if it takes no more than 20 minutes. And I will also make a plug, if you register your Smart Trip card, you can get your individual stats on the Smart Trip website. So you can look up your own on-time performance stats. I do that occasionally. My trip is, I can tell you, the Green Line mornings, pretty reliable. So you can see that. So that's what on-time performance means for Metro Rail. For Metro Bus, this is, I'm sorry, we look at time points, which are kind of major stops along a route. So it's not every single stop, it's a time point along a route. On average, there's like 6 to 7 time points on a route. Some have more, occasionally we have less. And it's no more than 2 minutes ahead of schedule or 7 minutes late, 7 minutes after the scheduled time. So it's a 2-minute early to 7-minute late window. And then for Metro Access, there is a scheduled arrival time. When you schedule a trip, you get an arrival time. So let's say I schedule a trip and I want it to arrive at 1 p.m. We say a trip is on time if the operator and the vehicle arrive, if I'm wanted at 1, between 12:45 and 1:15. So it's that 30-minute window on either side, 15 on either side of your trip.
Thank you. That was excellent. Is rail actually held to the minute in terms of like you said, your trip should be 20 minutes. If it's 21 minutes, it's late or delayed?
Yeah. Because of this, we do kind of internally, we can look, we can tell you externally too, but we can say like percentage of trips that are within that are 5 minutes of the schedule late or that kind of thing.
And for Metro Access, is that a standard across the industry in terms of how to determine on-time performance, or is it unique?
So I know there's a standard.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Klein. So I was, with a comment and a question. The first comment is big kudos, congratulations, and thank you to the entire team for performance in the second quarter. And this encouraging news is really good. And my question is, how do we message or communicate this good news to our entire workforce?
Great. Several tools that we have for this. One, we highlight these in employee newsletters. We also have some products. One, we call it COO's News, so COO News, where we summarize this for our modes for rail and bus, and post those submit them to staff, and post those in divisions so staff can see. We also have a host of monthly, we call them stat meetings, but it's where we review these results on a monthly basis we have one for rail, we have one for bus, we have one for facilities, we have one for access. We also have one for our service planning team. And so we review the results regularly and share them with staff.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smedberg?
Jordan, I just want to ask about the bus real quick, because something you just said. What about the operator shortage or vehicle breakdowns? I think measuring bus has got to be obviously very difficult because so many variables are outside of our control. But tell us a little bit about that and how that may factor into some of the numbers. It may skew them one way when it's, maybe not as bad overall, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, so where we really see the impact of the operator availability is on the missed service. So we covered it on that side. I will say for on-time performance, we're evaluating the service that we provide. So actually missed service isn't reflected in that number because we need to know whether a trip was delivered, whether it was on time or not, to evaluate it. So it doesn't necessarily show up in the on-time performance side, but it does show up in missed trips as well as the availability of predictions for customers.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. With no further business to come before the committee, we stand adjourned, and I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Smedberg, who has a request for the board to meet in executive session.
Thank you. In accordance with the bylaws, thank you, Jordan. Yeah. Tom. In accordance with the bylaws, I, Paul Smedberg, request that the Board of Directors convene an executive session to discuss the following matters pursuant to Article 2, Paragraph 9, subsections A, budgetary matters that may affect legal positions, WMATA contracts, or sensitive relationships with local jurisdictions or the federal government. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Deputy Mayor Babers. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. See you upstairs. Thank you, Matt.